Hi and welcome to the video on Grainlines. This video is about how to find the grain line on your fabric for a single pattern piece. During the course of this video, I'm going to show you how to find the grain line and why it affects your final garment. You're going to need a pattern piece, some fabric. You're going to need a ruler or set square and a pencil. You're going to need pattern weights and you're going to need a tape measure. Please note that this is a video on how to find the grain line for a single pattern piece. If you'd like to know more about how to lay up an entire pattern to create a garment from, you need to look for the video Laying Up Your Garment. So here we have what we're going to need. I've got a roll of fabric, I have a pattern piece, and I have my tape measure. Now it's essential that you have weights of some sort. If you can't afford or you don't have pattern weights, you can use things such as weights you use in the gym, perfectly acceptable, and a lot of students can use cans. Now you might laugh at this, but cans are really easy to use. They're a good weight to hold your card down with, they're easy to grasp, they don't move around much, and if you get hungry you can eat them. So don't discount using things around your house that are easy to find as your pattern weights. Now let's just look at our pattern piece for a second. I have a sleeve for a bomber jacket. The grain line that you can see here is marked in red. Now this grain line is too short. This is the reason we're going to need a ruler. You need to be able to extend the grain line as long as you can. You don't necessarily have to have the arrow going from one end to the other, but you need to at least use your set square or a ruler to extend this line to a position that you can see. The longer the grain line is, the better accuracy you will have in laying up your pattern piece, and the better the final garment will look when it's cut out and sewn and hanging on a body. So to extend this pattern piece, it's as simple as using the existing line and taking your pencil and extending it to the end and extending it to the top. And just as a hint, if you do this now, it will help you at the grading process because the grain line's already drawn in. It makes it really easy to grade your pattern piece. So let's have a look at our fabric. Fabric generally comes on a bolt or a roll, and it has a bound edge along the length of the fabric. This bound edge is called the selvage. This is the warp grain. The warp grain runs parallel to the selvage. What this means is when we are placing our pattern piece, we want to place our pattern piece with the grain line direction parallel to the length of the fabric. We can sometimes run our pattern piece on the cross grain, which is the weft, but generally the warp is the stronger direction. When we place our pattern piece down onto our fabric, we want to make sure that it doesn't go too close to the selvage. The selvage is a bound edge and we don't want to cut into it because it's firmer there. That's where the fabric is held when the fabric is being woven. If we use it in our pattern, what will happen is it will affect the fall of the garment. So get in the habit of making sure your pattern piece is a good 3 centimeters or just over an inch away from that selvage. In the fashion and garment industry, we always cut our fabric one layer right side up, and the fabric is always laid out lengthwise like this. It doesn't matter whether the roll is on your right or your left, depending on whether you're right or left-handed, but we only ever cut our fabric in one layer. Unlike home sewing, we do not have fold pieces. So make sure you get in the habit of laying your fabric up one layer right side up. So when I say one layer, that's one layer per garment. Of course, you could put 3 layers of fabric down and cut out 3 garments at once. You never cut them as a folded piece, and you never mark your patterns on the wrong side of the fabric. We only ever mark our patterns with chalk, and it's a good idea to get in the habit of only using white chalk. I only allow white chalk in my workroom because yellow and blue and red chalk can stain your fabric and it does not come out. So if you get in the habit of only ever using white chalk, there's no problem. Before we even get started with laying up our pattern piece, we actually need to step back and look at the fabric itself. If the fabric has texture, that's called nap, and we need to make sure that the nap will run the same way on each of the garment. So a good example of nap might be velvet or even fur. Generally with fabrics like that, we run the garment with the smooth up, but that's entirely up to you. This fabric here has a one-way print. The flower runs this way. So what this pattern piece needs to have in Red Vivid is one-way print written above the size in Red Vivid, and maybe a sketch of the direction that that print sits in. You can also put a one-sided or one-ended red arrow saying this way up, or anything that will help your cutter to know which direction you want this pattern to sit in. The other thing is that will also affect the way the pattern is laid up and therefore your yields. So place your pattern piece, making sure the head is the direction you want it to be, or up is the correct direction, and we're going to take our tape measure, and starting at one end we're going to measure from the selvage to the grain line. Now I have 23 centimeters at this end, so I want to make sure that I have the same measurement at the other end. So I'm going to measure from the selvage across. Now this end is too short, so this end of the pattern needs to come this way. What I do is put my finger on the first position I measured. I use that as a pivot point, just like an awl, and I guesstimate how much to bring this down, and I move my pattern like so. Then I repeat the process. I measure from the selvage to my grain line, and that's actually changed a little bit. That's just over 23, and I come to the other end, and this is just under 23. So we repeat the process. Use your finger as a pivot point, move the end of the pattern that you need, and I'm going to measure that again. Okay, so that's just over 23, and that's 23 and a half, so that's too much. What I'm going to do is hold that as a pivot point, move this out. I'm going to double check that measurement there, and I'm going to check that measurement there, and this is accurate, so I place my pattern weights down. If you want to now, you can also remeasure that. Make sure before you chalk around your pattern piece that you use a chalk sharpener and sharpen your chalk. Make sure you mark in your notches, and when you cut your notches, we're only going to cut them 3 millimeters, which is 1/8 of an inch deep. The other thing you do need to think about, which I haven't really covered in here, is making the most of your fabric. If I was doing this in a finished garment, I'd make sure that all this fabric here was used up. But if you're going to lay up an entire pattern, you need to make sure you don't use spare fabric like this. You need to start from a full width, but that's covered more fully in the video laying up your pattern pieces. The last thing I'd like to mention is chalking up. When you've chalked around this pattern piece and you go to cut it out, when we cut it out, we need to cut off the chalk. There should be no chalk on our final garment. If you cut on the wrong side of the chalk, your garment will grow in size and it won't give you an accurate garment, which won't be so much of an issue with pieces like a jacket sleeve. But when you start getting onto things like collars or smaller pattern pieces, it can be quite a big deal. So that's the reason you need to use your chalk sharpener to make sure the chalk is thin, as well as the fact we need to cut the chalk off. So we cut on the inside of the chalk line. Just like when you're grading a pattern piece, you always cut your pattern pencil off, so you're left with an accurate size change. It's a good idea now to watch the video laying up your pattern. That discusses laying up an entire pattern to optimize the fabric so we save money, and how to accurately do this and record the details in your specification sheets.